"What the hell are you doing here?" Ryan's voice cut through the noise of the mall like a blade. Before Nina could fully turn around, his hand shot forward and grabbed her wrist, pulling her away from the coffee counter toward a quieter corridor beside the service hallway. Nina lost her balance for a second, the paper cup in her hand shaking as hot coffee splashed slightly against the lid. Customers nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away, assuming it was a private argument. Ryan's fingers tightened painfully around her wrist as his eyes scanned her beige uniform and name tag. "You work here? Serving coffee?" he said in a harsh whisper. "Do you have any idea what this does to my reputation?" "I'm here meeting investors." Nina pulled her arm, but he didn't let go. "Let go," she said firmly. Ryan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You embarrassed me once. You're not doing it again. You're quitting this job. Today." That was the moment something inside her snapped into clarity. Nina suddenly jerked her arm backward and knocked his hand away. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. Nina lifted her chin, her voice steady and loud enough for people nearby to hear. "I came here to work," she said, "and that has nothing to do with you." A few people slowed their steps. A middle-aged couple paused near the directory screen. A man holding a shopping bag pretended to check his phone while watching from the corner of his eye. Ryan's jaw tightened. "You think this is acceptable?" he hissed. "My ex-wife working a service job in a public mall? It's an honest job," Nina replied. "I don't need your approval to live my life." Ryan stepped closer, anger simmering beneath his polished appearance. "You are making me look ridiculous in front of serious people." "No," Nina said calmly. "Your behavior is doing that." The words hit harder than he expected. For a brief moment, Ryan looked unsure, as if recalculating how much control he still had. "You never understood how the world works," he muttered. "And you never understood respect," Nina replied. Behind her, the espresso machine hissed as milk steamed loudly. The familiar sound helped her stay grounded. "I am working," she repeated. "You need to leave." Ryan glanced toward the open seating area where his business associates stood watching discreetly. Embarrassment crept across his face. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Nina turned, intending to walk back to the counter, but suddenly Ryan grabbed her arm again, this time harder, his composure finally cracking. "You don't walk away from me," he snapped. Nina tried to pull free, but his grip tightened, his frustration spilling into aggression. Several shoppers were now openly staring. Ryan's pride had been wounded in public, and that made him dangerous. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" he said, raising his other hand as if to strike her. Before the motion could complete, another hand intervened. A large, steady hand clamped around Ryan's wrist midair. The grip was calm, controlled, and impossibly strong. Ryan turned, startled. Standing beside them was a tall man in a dark tailored coat, his expression composed, his eyes cold and focused. Alexander Kane. His voice was low but carried a quiet authority that immediately silenced the tension around them. "A man who raises his hand against a woman disgraces himself," Alexander said evenly. Ryan tried to pull his arm free, but couldn't. Alexander's grip tightened slightly, not violently, but firmly enough to make the message unmistakable. "Violence against someone weaker," Alexander continued, his tone calm, "is not strength. It is humiliation." The surrounding noise of the mall seemed to fade. Ryan forced a short laugh, attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is none of your business." Alexander did not release his wrist. "It became my business," he said quietly, "when you forgot how to behave in public." Ryan's confidence faltered for a split second. Something about Alexander's stillness signaled consequence. Slowly, Alexander released his grip, but remained standing between Ryan and Nina. Nina instinctively took one small step back, her pulse racing, not from fear this time, but from relief she hadn't expected. Ryan adjusted his sleeve, masking discomfort. "This conversation isn't finished," he muttered, glaring at Nina. Alexander's gaze remained steady. "It is finished," he replied. Ryan hesitated, then stepped back, aware of the eyes now openly watching. He straightened his coat, nodded stiffly to his waiting associates, and walked away without another word. The tension dissolved into the everyday noise of the mall. Nina stood still for a moment, steadying her breathing. Alexander did not move closer than necessary. "You are safe," he said simply. Nina nodded once, still processing the sudden shift. Behind her, The espresso machine continued humming softly, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had changed. For the first time in a long time, someone had stepped forward instead of looking away. Nina stood still for several seconds after Ryan disappeared into the crowd, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the counter as she steadied her breathing. The normal sounds of the mall slowly returned to full volume, the hum of conversation, footsteps echoing across polished marble, distant laughter from families enjoying the afternoon. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt the same. Alexander Kane did not linger too close, nor did he attempt to speak immediately. He understood instinctively that dignity often required space. Instead, he gave a small nod, the kind one adult offers another when acknowledging that a difficult moment has passed but its weight still remains. "You handled that with restraint," he said calmly. Nina looked at him properly for the first time. He appeared to be about 40, composed, sharply dressed in a dark tailored coat that suggested quiet wealth rather than flashy display. His posture was relaxed, but there was something unmistakably authoritative in the way he held himself, as though he was accustomed to being listened to. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady, though softer than before. "You didn't have to step in." "Yes," he said evenly. "I did." The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. Most people avoided involvement. That was the unspoken rule in places like this. People respected privacy, sometimes even when privacy masked harm. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Nina added after a moment. "I saw a man behave poorly," Alexander said. "That part is not your responsibility." Behind the counter, Tasha approached cautiously, glancing between them. "Nina, do you need a break?" she asked quietly. "I'll be fine," Nina said, then hesitated before correcting herself. "Actually, yes. 5 minutes." Tasha nodded immediately. "I've got the register." Nina untied her apron slowly, folding it with care and placing it beneath the counter. Routine grounded her. Small habits restored control. Alexander gestured politely toward the seating area a short distance away. "Would you like to sit for a moment?" Shock has a way of arriving late. Nina almost smiled faintly at that observation. It was true. The body often held itself together until the danger had passed. They sat at a small table near the window overlooking the atrium. Sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, warming the tabletop between them. A server from the neighboring cafe approached cautiously. "Coffee?" he asked. "Chamomile tea," Alexander said calmly, glancing toward Nina as if confirming. She nodded once. The tea arrived quickly, steam curling gently upward. Nina wrapped both hands around the cup, allowing the warmth to steady the lingering tremor in her fingers. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Alexander did not ask intrusive questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply allowed silence to exist without discomfort. Finally, Nina exhaled slowly. "That man," she said, choosing her words carefully, "likes control." Alexander inclined his head slightly. "Yes, that was evident. He cares more about how things look than what they are." "That is also evident." Nina gave a small, humorless smile. "He always believed reputation was the same thing as character." Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, observing her with quiet attention. "And what do you believe?" he asked. Nina considered the question. "I believe people show who they are when they think no one important is watching." Alexander's gaze sharpened slightly at the phrasing. "An insightful distinction," he said. From the upper-level balcony, the soft echo of a pianist playing a familiar jazz standard drifted through the open space. The mall had hired live musicians on weekends to create a relaxed, upscale atmosphere appealing to older clientele who appreciated tradition. Nina noticed Alexander did not check his phone once. That alone distinguished him from most executives she had seen. "You're not worried he'll cause trouble for you?" Alexander asked. Nina gave a small shrug. "He might try, but he's always needed an audience. Without one, he loses interest." Alexander did not respond immediately. He had spent years studying patterns of behavior in men who confused dominance with strength. Ryan's type was familiar, externally polished, internally fragile, dependent on status reinforcement. "What you do for work," Alexander said after a moment, "is honest." Nina met his eyes briefly. "I know. And honest work," he continued, "requires more discipline than most people realize." That surprised her slightly. Most wealthy men did not speak respectfully about service jobs. "You don't seem embarrassed," he added. I was, Nina admitted quietly. Once. Not anymore. What changed? She hesitated. Silence costs more than pride, she said finally. Alexander gave a small nod of understanding. Across the atrium, an elderly couple shared a slice of cheesecake, talking slowly, comfortably. The way people spoke after decades of marriage had softened the need to impress each other. Stability. That was what Nina wanted. Nothing extravagant, just stable. Will he come back? Alexander asked. Probably, Nina said honestly. He doesn't like unfinished conversations. Alexander considered this calmly. Then it would be wise to ensure the next conversation occurs under different circumstances. Nina studied him carefully. You speak like someone used to preparing outcomes. I am, he replied simply. There was no arrogance in the statement. Only fact. You don't know me, she said gently. No, he agreed. But I know patterns. She absorbed that quietly. Tasha glanced over from the counter, giving Nina a reassuring thumbs up that everything was under control. Nina took another sip of tea. Thank you, she said sincerely. Most people wouldn't have stepped in. Alexander's expression did not change, but something thoughtful passed briefly through his eyes. Most people assume someone else will intervene, he said. That assumption allows many wrong things to continue longer than they should. The statement felt less like conversation and more like principle. Nina set the empty cup carefully on the table. I should get back, she said. Of course, Alexander replied, standing as well. He did not offer his hand. He did not ask personal questions. He did not intrude on her boundaries. Respect, Nina noticed, often appeared in what someone chose not to do. As she retied her apron behind the counter, she felt more aware of her posture, her breathing, her steady hands. Ryan had intended to make her feel small. Instead, something unexpected had happened. Someone had reminded her that dignity did not require permission. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching this video from today. Because every place, every voice, reminds someone that dignity is never a small thing. If you stand with Nina, if you believe no one should ever be made to feel small, don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, a simple click is more than support. It is a quiet way of saying, respect still matters. From the upper level, Alexander paused briefly before walking away, speaking quietly to a man waiting near the railing. Discreetly, he said. The man nodded once. Below, Nina served the next customer with the same calm professionalism as always. But this time, she knew someone had seen what happened and had not looked away. Nina finished the remainder of her shift with careful focus. But the steady rhythm she normally relied on felt slightly altered. Every sound seemed sharper. Every movement more deliberate. She double-checked each order, wiped the counter twice instead of once, and kept her voice calm even when her thoughts drifted back to the confrontation. Ryan's reappearance had not surprised her. In truth, she had expected it one day. Men like him rarely accepted the idea that someone they once controlled could continue existing outside their influence. What unsettled her more was the timing. He had not simply encountered her by accident. He had been meeting business associates at this mall. That meant their worlds, once separate, were still capable of colliding. Near the end of her shift, the late afternoon crowd began to thin. The after-work professionals had not yet arrived, and the weekend shoppers had already begun heading home. The lighting inside the mall softened slightly as the sun lowered beyond the glass ceiling, casting long reflections across the polished floor. Tasha leaned against the counter while refilling lids. That guy looked intense, she said quietly. Nina gave a small nod. He prefers control. You handled it well, Tasha added. I handled it, Nina corrected gently. Tasha hesitated. Do you think he'll come back? Yes, Nina said calmly. But next time he'll be more careful. Tasha frowned slightly. Careful? People like him protect their image first, Nina explained. If they lose that, everything else starts to fall apart. Tasha considered that, clearly filing the insight away. You want me to walk you to the parking garage later? She asked. I take the train, Nina replied. Tasha nodded. Still, text me when you get home? I will. That small exchange, simple as it was, reminded Nina that support did not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through ordinary kindness. At 6 o'clock, Nina clocked out and retrieved her coat from the employee locker area. The fabric was inexpensive but warm enough for Chicago's unpredictable autumn weather. She checked her phone briefly. No unknown messages, no blocked calls attempting to reappear. For now, Ryan had chosen retreat. As Nina stepped back into the main atrium, she noticed how different the mall felt when she was no longer behind the counter. Without the barrier of the register, she was simply another individual among many. Another person carrying a handbag. Another face in the slow-moving crowd. She passed a bookstore window displaying biographies of political leaders and business innovators, many of them written for readers who believed perseverance and discipline still mattered. A white-haired man near the entrance adjusted his glasses while reading the back cover of a hardcover edition, his wife waiting patiently beside him. There was something reassuring about the quiet routines of people who had lived long enough to know the difference between image and substance. Near the escalators, a jazz trio had begun playing soft instrumental music. The notes echoed gently through the open space, calming rather than distracting. Nina moved toward the train entrance connected to the lower level, when she noticed a familiar figure standing near the railing above. Alexander Kane. He appeared to be speaking quietly with a man in a charcoal suit, likely an associate. His posture remained composed, his gestures minimal. Even in stillness, there was a sense of authority about him that did not require display. Nina did not intend to approach him, but as she descended the escalator, he looked up briefly, as though aware of her presence without needing confirmation. Their eyes met only for a moment. He gave a slight nod, respectful, not intrusive. She returned the gesture. No words were necessary. Outside, the Chicago air carried the crisp edge of evening. The streetlights flickered on gradually, illuminating the sidewalks with a steady glow. Commuters moved with quiet purpose toward train stations and parking garages, their routines shaped by decades of predictable rhythm. Nina wrapped her coat closer and began walking toward the train entrance. Halfway down the block, she sensed footsteps behind her, not threatening, but measured. Instinct sharpened her awareness. She glanced discreetly at the reflection in a storefront window. Two men stood near a parked dark sedan, appearing to read something on a phone. Their posture was relaxed, but attentive. Not security guards, observers. Nina continued walking without reacting. She had learned long ago that not every presence was danger. Some presences were protection, even when unspoken. At the station platform, commuters stood spaced apart, each absorbed in their own thoughts. A middle-aged woman read a paperback novel. A construction worker sipped coffee from a thermos. A retired couple discussed dinner plans in low voices. Ordinary life continued. Nina allowed herself to breathe more deeply. For years, Ryan had shaped the boundaries of her decisions. Where she lived, who she saw, how she spoke, even how she interpreted silence. Now, something subtle had shifted. Someone had stepped into a moment most people avoided. Not dramatically, not loudly, simply firmly. And that firmness had reminded her of something she had nearly forgotten. Respect was not granted by wealth. It was demonstrated by behavior. When the train arrived, Nina found a seat near the window. The city lights slid past slowly as the train moved north. Brick buildings, corner diners, laundromats, old theaters converted into community centers, each neighborhood carried its own quiet history. Chicago was a city built by people who worked with their hands as often as their minds. People who believed dignity came from contribution, not performance. Nina rested her hands calmly in her lap. Ryan would not disappear easily, but he had been interrupted, and interruption, she knew, was often the first crack in a pattern that believed itself permanent. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking the river, Alexander Kane reviewed a short report placed discreetly on his desk. The document contained only essential information. Ryan Caldwell, business structure, financial exposure, outstanding liabilities. Alexander closed the folder without comment. Patterns always revealed themselves when observed long enough, and he had never believed in allowing a pattern of cruelty to continue unchecked. Monday morning arrived with the quiet discipline of routine, the kind that comforted people who had learned to value stability over excitement. Nina woke before her alarm, the early light of Chicago filtering through the thin curtains of her small apartment. The space was modest but orderly, a reflection of her priorities: a clean kitchen counter, a neatly folded throw blanket over the back of the couch, a small framed photograph of Lake Michigan taken during a peaceful walk months earlier. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative, just a life built carefully, step by step. She brewed her coffee slowly, listening to the soft hum of the machine. The smell grounded her. Ritual mattered. Routine rebuilt confidence in ways grand gestures never could. Her phone remained silent on the counter. No missed calls, no unknown numbers, no messages from Ryan. That silence did not mean safety. It meant calculation. Ryan had never been impulsive for long. He preferred strategies that allowed him to maintain the illusion of control. Nina understood that better than anyone. During their marriage, anger had often been followed by carefully structured consequences disguised as coincidence. The train ride downtown felt ordinary. Commuters in pressed coats reviewed emails. A gray-haired man read the financial section of the newspaper with a pen tucked behind his ear. A woman in her late 50s discussed her grandson's college applications on the phone, her voice warm with pride. These were the rhythms of people who valued continuity, people who had lived long enough to understand that reputation built slowly was stronger than reputation built loudly. At Lakeview Grand Mall, the morning shift carried its usual quiet pace. Retail employees greeted each other with familiar nods. Store gates rolled upward with metallic echoes. The scent of fresh pastries drifted across the atrium. Denise was already reviewing inventory sheets when Nina tied her apron. "You doing all right today?" Denise asked gently, her reading glasses resting low on her nose. "Yes," Nina answered. "Thank you for asking." Denise nodded once. She did not press for details. People from her generation understood that respect often meant allowing someone to maintain composure without interrogation. "If anything affects your ability to work," Denise said carefully, "you let me know." "I will." The morning customers included retirees meeting for coffee after early walks, professionals stopping briefly before office hours, and a group of older women discussing a charity luncheon scheduled later that week. "2 cappuccinos, extra foam," one of them said with a polite smile. "Of course," Nina replied. Her hands remained steady as she worked the espresso machine. The rhythm soothed her. By 10:30, the mall had begun filling with late-morning shoppers. The jazz trio returned to the upper-level balcony, playing soft instrumentals that echoed gently through the open architecture. At 11:15, Denise approached Nina with a concerned expression. "There's someone here asking about you," she said quietly. Nina's pulse remained controlled. "Who?" "Mall administration office." That was unexpected. Nina wiped her hands carefully and followed Denise down the corridor toward a glass-walled office near the central security station. Inside sat a middle-aged administrator in a navy blazer, posture formal but not unfriendly. "Miss Walker," he said, standing politely. "Thank you for coming." Nina nodded. "We received a complaint late yesterday afternoon," he continued, consulting a tablet. "A customer reported what he described as an uncomfortable altercation near the cafe." Nina remained composed. "I understand," she said. "We are not assigning fault," the administrator clarified calmly. "However, individuals with public business profiles occasionally express concern about perceived reputational association." There it was. Ryan had moved quickly. "What kind of concern?" Nina asked. A statement was submitted claiming an employee engaged in disruptive personal conflict within the commercial space. Nina absorbed the phrasing. Carefully constructed, legally cautious, emotionally manipulative. Denise crossed her arms gently. "I was present," she said firmly. Our employee remained professional. The administrator nodded respectfully. "We appreciate that perspective." He paused before continuing. The individual submitting the complaint suggested that continued exposure to such situations could discourage certain clients from conducting business meetings within the mall. Nina understood the implication. Ryan was attempting to apply pressure indirectly. Denise spoke again. "Our staff have the right to work without harassment." The administrator nodded once more. "Agreed." He closed the tablet. "At this time, no disciplinary action is being considered. However, we encourage maintaining a neutral environment." Neutral, another carefully chosen word. "I maintain professionalism at all times," Nina replied calmly. "We have no evidence to suggest otherwise," the administrator said. Meeting concluded. Outside the office, Denise exhaled slowly. "Some people confuse influence with authority," she muttered. Nina offered a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you." Denise adjusted her glasses. "I've worked retail 30 years, she said. "Seen every type of ego walk through these doors. Reputation built on fear never lasts." Nina returned to the cafe with renewed clarity. Ryan had not attacked directly. He had tested leverage, but the structure of his influence was thinner than he believed. Across the city, Alexander Kane sat in a quiet conference room overlooking the Chicago River. The morning sunlight reflected across the water, casting shifting light patterns on the glass walls. Michael Reeves placed a discreet file on the table. Preliminary review, Michael said. Alexander opened the folder. Ryan Caldwell's company structure appeared impressive at surface level. Investment partnerships, commercial real estate ventures, development contracts. But deeper review revealed aggressive borrowing patterns, leveraged expansion, delayed obligations, dependence on continued perception of success. Fragile architecture, Michael observed. Alexander closed the file calmly. Pride financed by projection, he said. Michael inclined his head. There is additional exposure, he added. Alexander did not ask for explanation immediately. Patterns revealed themselves naturally when allowed time. Back at the mall, Nina completed the lunch rush without incident. Yet something had changed internally. Fear had once dictated her decisions. Now awareness guided them. She understood Ryan would attempt again, but she also understood something new. His influence depended on silence, and silence was no longer guaranteed. As the afternoon light shifted across the polished floor, Nina placed a cup of tea in front of an elderly customer who smiled warmly. "Kindness still exists," the woman said. Nina returned the smile gently. "Yes," she replied. "It does." Across Chicago, two separate individuals continued their day with quiet resolve, neither announcing intention, neither seeking attention, but both fully aware that certain lines, once crossed, required response. And some responses did not arrive loudly. They arrived precisely. Tuesday unfolded with the quiet persistence of unresolved tension. Nina arrived early again, preferring the calm minutes before customers filled the cafe. The mall at that hour belonged mostly to employees unlocking gates, janitorial staff guiding silent machines across polished floors, and the soft scent of fresh bread drifting from the bakery near the east entrance. It was the kind of quiet that allowed a person to think clearly. She tied her apron slowly, checking the alignment of her name tag in the reflection of the stainless steel espresso machine. Order mattered. Small details created a sense of stability when larger circumstances felt uncertain. Denise approached holding a clipboard but paused before speaking, her expression thoughtful. "You ever notice," Denise said, lowering her voice, "how some people try to solve discomfort by removing whatever reminds them of it?" Nina gave a small nod. "I've noticed." Denise tapped the clipboard gently against her palm. "Mall administration forwarded another message early this morning," she said carefully. "Same individual, same complaint." Nina did not need clarification. Ryan had escalated from embarrassment to persistence. "He claims he felt threatened," Denise continued, her tone neutral but skeptical. Nina allowed herself the smallest breath of irony. "Threatened," she repeated. Denise raised an eyebrow. Apparently the presence of an unfamiliar man intervening in what he calls a personal discussion created distress. Nina understood immediately. Ryan had reframed the narrative, positioned himself as the victim. A familiar tactic. "Is there any actual concern from management?" Nina asked. Denise shook her head. "They know a reputation pattern when they see one," she said quietly. "People with stable credibility don't usually file emotional complaints 24 hours later." Nina appreciated the subtle support. "Still," Denise added, "we document everything." Documentation protected everyone. At 9:30, the morning rush began. Professionals stopped briefly before office hours, requesting cappuccinos, Americanos, simple black coffee. Nina greeted each customer with steady politeness. Routine remained her strongest defense. Near 10 o'clock, a woman in her early 60s paused at the counter, her posture upright, her tone warm. "You seem calm under pressure," the woman observed while waiting for her tea. Nina offered a small smile. "Experience teaches patience." The woman nodded approvingly. "Patience and dignity outlast noise," she said. That sentence stayed with Nina after the woman left. Noise. Ryan specialized in noise disguised as influence. Across the city, Alexander Kane sat at a long conference table reviewing updated financial summaries. The skyline beyond the windows reflected the muted gray of an overcast morning. Chicago's architecture had always impressed him, strength built through discipline, not decoration. Michael Reeves placed another folder beside the previous day's report. "Debt layering confirmed," Michael said quietly. Alexander skimmed the documents. Ryan Caldwell's company relied heavily on projected expansion tied to investor confidence. Several developments had been leveraged against expected revenue that had not yet materialized. Confidence was the foundation. Confidence was also fragile. Public image sustains liquidity, Michael continued. Alexander closed the folder calmly. And public image, he replied, depends on perceived stability. Michael inclined his head. A pause followed. Alexander did not rush decisions. He believed rushed decisions often revealed emotional motives. He preferred structural responses. Back at the mall, Nina completed a series of orders without interruption. The lunch crowd included attorneys meeting quietly over salads, retired couples sharing soup, and small groups of longtime friends maintaining weekly traditions. These customers valued consistency, predictability, reliability. Nina understood why that mattered more with age. Stability created trust. Trust created community. Shortly after noon, Tasha approached with concern in her expression. "There's a man near the directory asking about employee policies," she whispered. Nina did not immediately look up. "Describe him. Tall, expensive coat, looks irritated." Ryan again. He was not shouting. He was not causing a visible disturbance. He was applying pressure indirectly. Nina finished preparing a latte before allowing herself to glance discreetly toward the central atrium. Ryan stood speaking with a junior administrator, posture controlled, gestures precise. He smiled occasionally, the practiced expression of a man accustomed to persuading others through confidence rather than truth. Nina felt no panic, only clarity. Ryan required validation. Without it, he pressed harder. Denise stepped forward before Nina needed to react. "I'll handle communication," Denise said quietly. Professional boundaries mattered. Ryan noticed Nina watching from the counter. For a brief moment, their eyes met. He expected discomfort. Instead, he found composure. That unsettled him. He ended the conversation shortly after and exited the mall with visible restraint. Tasha exhaled slowly. "He really wants attention," she murmured. Nina resumed wiping the counter. "He wants control," she corrected. Later that afternoon, Denise gathered the staff for a brief meeting in the break room. "Our responsibility," Denise said calmly, "is professionalism. External behavior does not define internal standards." The staff nodded. Most were young, still learning how to separate personal stress from professional identity. Denise continued, "No employee should feel ashamed of honest work." Nina appreciated the statement more than Denise likely realized. Across the river, Alexander reviewed a second set of documents highlighting inconsistencies in Ryan's projected revenue streams. Several investment commitments appeared contingent on continued perception of upward momentum. Momentum built on image vulnerable to scrutiny. Michael spoke carefully. "Confidence markets are sensitive." Alexander nodded once. "Confidence requires credibility," he said. "And credibility," Michael added, "requires consistency." Alexander closed the file. Ryan had built influence through impression. Impression alone rarely survived sustained pressure. That evening, Nina left work at her usual time. The sky had darkened earlier than expected, clouds pressing low over the city skyline. Chicago's autumn evenings carried a seriousness that older residents often described as grounding, a reminder that seasons changed regardless of preference. On the train ride home, Nina reflected on the day without anxiety. Ryan had attempted escalation, but escalation required response, and response did not always require confrontation. Sometimes response required patience. As the train passed rows of brick buildings and quiet neighborhoods, Nina rested her head lightly against the window. She did not know what Alexander Kane intended. She did not know whether Ryan would attempt further pressure. But she knew one thing with certainty. Her life was no longer structured around Ryan's approval, and once that structure collapsed, many others tended to follow. Across the city, two individuals continued separate evenings shaped by similar principles. Order mattered, dignity mattered, and patterns, once revealed, rarely remained hidden for long. Wednesday morning carried a heavier stillness than the previous days, the kind of stillness that suggested movement beneath the surface, unseen but undeniable. Nina sensed it before anything tangible occurred. Experience had taught her that tension often appeared first as quiet. The sky above Chicago remained overcast, the pale light filtering between buildings in muted tones. The air held the faint chill of early autumn, settling deeper into the city. Commuters moved with familiar efficiency, coats buttoned, coffee cups in hand. expressions thoughtful but composed. Older residents often described mornings like this as honest. No illusions, no distractions, just the steady progression of responsibilities. Nina arrived at Lakeview Grand Mall 10 minutes early, unlocking her locker and placing her folded scarf neatly inside. She studied her reflection briefly in the mirror mounted on the inside of the locker door. Her expression looked calm, but her eyes held sharper awareness than the week before. She stepped behind the counter and began preparing the espresso machine, checking water levels, aligning cups, ensuring every small detail was correct. Order reinforced confidence. Routine restored control. Denise entered shortly after, carrying a small paper bag that smelled faintly of toasted cinnamon. "Brought extra muffins," she said, placing the bag on the counter. "People handle stress better when they eat." Nina allowed herself a small smile. "That's generous." Denise adjusted her glasses. "I've worked long enough to know tension spreads faster on an empty stomach." The comment, simple as it sounded, reflected a generational wisdom Nina respected. People over 45 often understood that emotional stability depended on physical grounding. Meals mattered. Rest mattered. Small comforts created resilience. At 9:15, the mall doors opened fully to the public. The morning passed without interruption. Customers ordered their usual drinks, discussed familiar topics, and moved through predictable routines. A retired accountant described interest rate changes to a friend. A grandmother compared school photos on her phone. A businessman thanked Nina for remembering his preference for less foam. Normalcy created contrast. At 11, Denise approached Nina quietly. "Mall administration updated the complaint file," she said. Nina continued preparing a cappuccino. "What changed?" Denise lowered her voice. "The individual now claims emotional distress due to perceived intimidation." Nina absorbed the phrasing carefully. Ryan was shifting his argument again, positioning himself as the harmed party. "He's trying to create documentation," Nina said calmly. Denise nodded. "Yes, documentation could shape perception. Perception could shape opportunity." Ryan understood influence, but influence relied on consistency, and his behavior had already created inconsistencies. At noon, Nina noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere near the central atrium. Two men in conservative business attire stood near the information desk, speaking quietly with administrative staff. Their posture suggested evaluation rather than casual conversation. They were not mall employees. They carried themselves with the quiet efficiency of individuals accustomed to reviewing risk. Nina did not star. She had learned that observation rarely required visible attention. One of the men briefly glanced toward the cafe before returning his attention to the administrator. Denise followed Nina's gaze. "Financial compliance consultants," Denise whispered. "Hired by property management when high-value tenants create legal noise." Ryan's actions had triggered scrutiny rather than support. Patterns continued revealing themselves. Across the city, Alexander Kane reviewed updated findings in his office overlooking the river. The steady gray water reflected the heavy clouds above, mirroring the quiet seriousness of the morning. Michael Reeves stood beside the desk, tablet in hand. "Further inconsistencies identified," Michael said. Alexander read the summary without visible reaction. Several of Ryan Caldwell's development partnerships relied on projected investment confidence tied directly to his personal credibility. That credibility depended heavily on perceived stability in both professional and personal conduct. Emotional volatility weakened investor confidence. Repeated complaints weakened perceived stability. "His structure depends on uninterrupted perception," Michael added. Alexander closed the document. "Perception weakens when contradictions multiply," he said. Michael inclined his head. Strategic pressure did not require aggression. It required patience. Back at the mall, Nina served a group of longtime customers who met weekly after volunteer shifts at a local church. They spoke about community fundraisers, neighborhood safety, and the importance of supporting small businesses. Their conversation reflected values common among older Americans: responsibility, accountability, mutual respect. "You keep this place running smoothly," one of them told Nina warmly. "I try," she replied. "Consistency builds trust," the woman said. Trust, another form of stability Ryan could not manufacture through appearance alone. At 1:30, Tasha approached again, her expression curious. "The same man returned earlier," she said quietly. "Ryan?" Nina asked. Tasha nodded. He spoke with legal administration this time, stayed calm, smiled a lot. Nina understood the tactic. Calm presentation created plausible credibility, but repeated complaints created patterns. Patterns invited examination. Denise joined them. Property management has zero interest in becoming part of personal disputes, she said calmly. They prefer quiet tenants. Ryan's actions were creating noise. Noise reduced confidence. Confidence influenced financing. The chain reaction had begun. Later that afternoon, Nina stepped briefly into the staff corridor to retrieve additional supplies. The hallway remained quiet, lit by soft overhead lights reflecting against clean tile floors. As she turned the corner, she noticed one of the compliance consultants speaking with mall security. Professional tone, measured gestures, review in progress. She did not slow her pace. Her role remained unchanged. Serve customers. Maintain professionalism. Preserve dignity. Across Chicago, Alexander concluded his meeting with a brief instruction. Continue observation, he said. Michael nodded once. Patterns did not require force. They required exposure. By evening, the mall returned to its calmer rhythm as weekday shoppers replaced weekend crowds. Older patrons preferred weekday visits, enjoying quieter environments that allowed conversation without interruption. Nina served tea to a retired school principal who always thanked her by name. Respect is built quietly, the woman said while stirring honey into her cup. Nina nodded gently. Yes, she replied. Quiet strength often went unnoticed by those seeking spectacle, but quiet strength endured longer. As Nina prepared to leave for the evening, she felt no immediate fear of Ryan's next move. His strategy depended on control. Control required certainty, and certainty had begun to shift. Across the city skyline, office lights flickered on one by one as dusk settled. Two individuals continued separate evenings guided by similar principles. Patience revealed truth, and truth, once visible, rarely returned to hiding. Thursday morning arrived with a subtle but unmistakable shift in tone. The tension that had quietly gathered over the previous days had begun to crystallize into consequence. Nina sensed it the moment she stepped onto the polished floor of Lakeview Grand Mall. People moved as they always did, yet there was an undercurrent of alertness in the administrative offices, a subtle tightening of professionalism in conversations that would normally remain casual. Routine remained her anchor. She clocked in at 8:02 a.m., tied her apron with practiced precision, and began calibrating the espresso machine. The steady click of ceramic cups touching marble felt reassuringly ordinary. Denise reviewed delivery invoices nearby, glasses low on her nose, lips pressed in quiet concentration. Morning seems calmer, Nina said. Denise gave a thoughtful hum. Calm before decisions, she replied. Nina understood. Decisions rarely announce themselves loudly. They arrive through policy changes, documentation reviews, carefully worded emails. At 9:30 a.m., the first noticeable deviation appeared. Mall management scheduled a formal meeting with tenant relations representatives regarding reputational risk exposure. The phrasing alone signaled that Ryan's continued complaints had reached a threshold requiring structured review. Denise approached Nina with composed seriousness. They want to ensure employee safety policies are clearly documented, she said. Nina nodded. That seems reasonable. Denise's expression softened. You are not under investigation. I didn't assume I was. That's why I appreciate working with you, Denise said quietly. Professional composure often revealed character more clearly than emotional reaction. At 10:15 a.m., Nina served a regular customer, Mr. Halverson, a retired engineer who visited every Thursday morning precisely at the same time. He wore a pressed navy jacket and carried himself with the posture of someone accustomed to solving problems methodically. You appear focused today, he observed. Focus helps, Nina replied. He stirred his coffee slowly. Disruptions test structure, he said. Nina gave a small acknowledging nod. Yes, they do. His generation valued stability built through consistency. He did not ask questions, yet his observation carried understanding. At 11 o'clock, Denise was called briefly into the tenant administration office. She returned 15 minutes later, expression thoughtful, but calm. They are documenting external communications, she explained quietly. From Ryan? Nina asked. Yes. And? Denise folded her arms lightly. He has contacted 2 departments claiming ongoing reputational discomfort. Nina absorbed the phrasing. Reputational discomfort. a vague term intended to create pressure without requiring evidence. Denise continued, however, property management prioritizes stability of operations over individual sensitivity claims, meaning Ryan's strategy was producing diminishing returns. Across the city, Alexander Kane reviewed updated legal summaries delivered that morning. The financial exposure surrounding Ryan Caldwell's firm had grown clearer with each analysis. Leveraged capital structures often required consistent confidence to remain stable. Confidence required credibility. Credibility required restraint. Repeated complaints suggested instability. Michael Reeves placed a final summary on the desk. His lenders are cautious, Michael said. Alexander skimmed the figures. Several short-term financing agreements contained clauses allowing review under conditions of reputational risk impacting projected performance. Ryan's behavior had begun affecting perception. Perception influenced valuation. Valuation influenced leverage. Leverage influenced survival. Alexander closed the document calmly. Continue monitoring, he said. Pressure applied correctly did not require confrontation. It required exposure of imbalance. Back at the mall, Nina continued her shift without interruption. The lunch crowd arrived gradually, composed largely of professionals who appreciated efficiency and discretion. Conversations centered on business forecasts, retirement planning, healthcare changes, grandchildren's graduations. The values remained consistent: reliability, responsibility, dignity. At 1:20 p.m., Tasha approached, with a subtle glance toward the central atrium. "He's here again," she whispered. Nina did not immediately turn. "Alone?" "Yes." Nina completed the latte she was preparing before looking up briefly. Ryan stood near the directory, speaking with a mall legal liaison. His posture remained controlled, but there was a tightness in his jaw that suggested strain beneath the surface. Repeated attempts without desired outcome often produced frustration. Frustration produced miscalculation. Denise stepped forward again, intercepting the interaction before Ryan approached the cafe. Professional boundaries reinforced institutional neutrality. Ryan's conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He departed without approaching Nina directly. Tasha exhaled quietly. "He looks less confident," she murmured. Confidence built on perception often weakened when perception fractured. Later that afternoon, Nina observed a subtle increase in administrative presence near the atrium. Quiet conversations, discreet note-taking, procedural awareness. No one spoke openly about the situation. Professional environments rarely required public acknowledgement to produce change. At 3:45 p.m., Denise gathered the staff briefly. "External pressure does not alter internal standards," she said calmly. Several employees nodded. Denise continued, "Our responsibility is professionalism. Professionalism protects everyone." Nina appreciated the clarity. Ryan's influence relied on creating discomfort. Discomfort reduced when structure remained steady. Across the river, Alexander received confirmation that 2 of Ryan's minor investment partners had requested updated performance assurances. A predictable response. Investors disliked unpredictability. Unpredictability suggested instability. Instability reduced confidence. Confidence sustained leverage. Michael spoke carefully. Market sensitivity increasing. Alexander nodded once. "Predictable," he said. Late afternoon light shifted across the mall's upper glass ceiling, casting long reflections along the polished floor. The jazz trio began playing a slower melody, the kind that resonated with older patrons who valued familiarity over novelty. Nina served tea to a retired judge who thanked her with formal courtesy. "Consistency," he remarked while placing exact change on the counter, "is the foundation of trust." "Yes," Nina replied. Trust accumulated quietly. Trust rarely needed announcement. As Nina prepared to close her register for the day, she reflected on the progression of the week. Ryan had attempted intimidation, then complaint, then influence. Each attempt had produced increased scrutiny rather than compliance. Patterns had begun to shift. Across the city skyline, office lights illuminated gradually as dusk approached. Alexander stood by the window of his office overlooking the river, observing reflections ripple across the darkening water. Patterns rarely collapsed dramatically. They weakened incrementally, until correction became inevitable. Neither Nina nor Alexander sought confrontation, but neither ignored imbalance, and imbalance, once visible, rarely remained tolerated indefinitely. Friday morning arrived with quiet clarity, the kind of clarity that followed several days of tension settling into visible consequences. Nina noticed the change not through any single dramatic event, but through the steady shift in how people carried themselves around the administrative offices of Lakeview Grand Mall. Conversations were shorter, more precise. Documentation moved faster. Decisions were approaching. Nina arrived 10 minutes early again, placing her bag inside her locker and smoothing the sleeves of her light gray sweater before tying her apron. She valued predictability, especially when external pressures attempted to introduce uncertainty. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and freshly baked croissants. The espresso machine warmed with a steady hum, a familiar sound that grounded her in routine. Tasha was already preparing milk pitchers, her movements efficient but slightly more attentive than usual. "You feel that?" Tasha asked quietly. Nina glanced at her. "Yes, like something is about to settle," Tasha added. "That's often how accountability feels," Nina replied. Denise entered carrying printed memos, her expression composed but purposeful. "Mall administration completed review of the complaint pattern," she said calmly. "They've categorized the situation as external interference with employee operations." Nina nodded slowly, meaning Ryan's continued efforts had triggered formal classification. Professional institutions valued stability. Repeated disruption created liability. Denise placed the memos in a drawer without ceremony. "No action required from you," she added. "I understand." Denise adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. Reputation built over decades is rarely shaken by a few poorly written complaints. Experience spoke through her tone. Customers began arriving shortly after 9. The morning crowd included a retired physician reading the Wall Street Journal, a married couple discussing travel plans for their 40th anniversary, and 2 longtime friends debating local politics with calm familiarity. Their conversations reflected values shaped through decades of lived experience. Measured judgment, personal accountability, appreciation for resilience. Nina greeted each customer with the same steady professionalism she had maintained all week. Consistency remained her quiet statement. At 10:20 a.m., the mall's legal liaison visited the cafe briefly to confirm procedural closure of the complaint file. His tone remained neutral, respectful. "The matter has been documented and reviewed," he said. "No operational concerns were identified." Nina inclined her head politely. "Thank you." He paused briefly. "Professional composure is noted," he added. "Recognition without publicity." That was often how institutions expressed support. Across the city, Alexander Kane reviewed a concise summary delivered by Michael Reeves. 2 of Ryan Caldwell's secondary lenders had requested updated financial assurances earlier that morning. Investor confidence had begun adjusting in response to perceived instability in Ryan's public conduct. Market perception influenced lending behavior. Lending behavior influenced operational capacity. Ryan's pattern of reaction had begun affecting his professional standing. Michael spoke carefully. "His credit extensions are sensitive to reputational variance." Alexander closed the folder calmly. "Predictable," he said. Financial structures built heavily on image often weakened when image became inconsistent. Alexander did not celebrate the development. Correction of imbalance was not victory. It was restoration of proportion. Back at the mall, Nina noticed Ryan did not appear that day. Absence communicated information as clearly as presence. Pressure applied through formal channels often redirected attention. At noon, Denise gathered the staff briefly. "The situation has been resolved administratively," she said. Several employees exchanged relieved glances. Tasha smiled slightly. "Quiet endings are my favorite kind," she murmured. Denise allowed herself a small, approving nod. Quiet endings usually mean the right process is worked. Later that afternoon, an elderly man paused at the counter, studying Nina thoughtfully before speaking. "I've been coming here 20 years, he said. "Places that respect their people tend to last." Nina appreciated the observation. "Respect builds loyalty," she replied. "Exactly," he said, lifting his cup slightly in acknowledgement. Community trust strengthened institutional stability. Stability reduced vulnerability to outside pressure. As the day progressed, Nina felt tension leaving her shoulders gradually. Ryan's strategy had relied on discomfort, but discomfort had not produced compliance. Instead, it had produced scrutiny. Scrutiny often revealed imbalance. Across Chicago's financial district, Alexander reviewed final notes confirming no further escalation required. Ryan's behavior had already triggered self-correction within his professional network. Partners valued predictability. Lenders valued discretion. Patterns had consequences. Michael closed his tablet. Monitoring will continue, he said. Alexander nodded once. Observation remained more effective than confrontation. Late afternoon light softened across the mall's glass ceiling. The jazz trio played a slower arrangement of a familiar standard, the melody resonating gently with older patrons who valued continuity over novelty. Nina served tea to a retired couple celebrating their anniversary. They spoke quietly about the importance of patience in long marriages. Stability isn't exciting, the husband said with a faint smile, but it is reliable. His wife squeezed his hand gently. Reliable is underrated. Nina smiled politely. Yes, it is. At closing time, Denise approached Nina near the register. You maintained professionalism throughout, she said calmly. That's the job, Nina replied. Denise studied her expression briefly. Some people mistake restraint for weakness, she said. It isn't. Nina appreciated the affirmation. Restraint preserved dignity. Dignity reinforced stability. Outside, the evening air carried a crisp calm typical of Chicago's early autumn. Streetlights reflected softly against polished sidewalks as commuters made their way home. Nina walked toward the train station with steady steps. She did not feel triumphant. She felt balanced. Ryan had attempted to impose influence through discomfort, but institutions built on long-term trust did not shift easily under short-term pressure. Across the river, Alexander stood briefly at his office window before turning off the lights. Patterns had corrected. No spectacle required. Quiet justice rarely announced itself loudly, but it endured longer than intimidation ever could. 9 months later, the rhythm of Lakeview Grand Mall had settled into a new normal, the kind that felt almost inevitable in hindsight. Autumn had long passed into winter and returned again to early summer. And the city of Chicago moved forward the way it always did, steadily, without apology, shaped by the quiet endurance of the people who built their lives within it. Nina Walker adjusted the sleeve of her tailored navy blazer as she walked across the polished floor of the atrium. The familiar scent of coffee still lingered in the air, but her role within that environment had changed. She no longer stood behind the counter taking orders. Now she reviewed operational flow, staff scheduling, and customer experience standards for 3 cafe locations newly integrated into the mall's premium service network. Her promotion had not been dramatic. It had come gradually, logically, as her consistency continued to demonstrate measurable value. Denise had recommended her for shift supervisor first. 3 months later, regional management had recognized her ability to maintain both professionalism and team morale under pressure. Reliability had built trust. Trust had built opportunity. The uniform apron had been replaced by structured blazers, neutral-toned blouses, and a name badge that read Customer Experience Manager. The title itself mattered less to Nina than what it represented. Stability earned through patience, rather than granted through appearance. The morning briefing had just concluded. Nina had reviewed staffing allocations, discussed vendor consistency, and reminded her team of the principles she considered foundational. Customers remember how they feel more than what they buy, she told them calmly. Respect creates loyalty. Several of the older employees nodded in agreement. Many had spent decades working in retail environments and understood that courtesy was not simply politeness. It was strategy. At 10:30, Nina walked through the central atrium conducting her usual observational round. The jazz trio played softly from the upper-level balcony, performing a familiar standard that resonated warmly with longtime visitors who appreciated continuity. Lakeview Grand Mall had quietly expanded its reputation as a professional meeting location favored by experienced executives, consultants, and community leaders. The environment reflected a balance between modern efficiency and traditional courtesy. Near the fountain, Nina paused briefly to greet Mr. Halverson, the retired engineer who had continued his weekly visits without interruption. You seem well positioned these days, he observed approvingly. I'm grateful for steady progress, Nina replied. He nodded thoughtfully. Stability compounds like interest, he said. Small gains, sustained consistently. Wisdom often arrived in simple sentences. Later that afternoon, Nina reviewed service reports in the small glass office overlooking the atrium. Her desk remained organized. A leather notebook, neatly aligned documents, a ceramic mug containing tea rather than coffee. The shift reflected her preference for clarity over stimulation. Denise entered carrying updated scheduling forms. You've built something steady here, Denise said. Nina gave a modest smile. The team built it. Denise placed the documents down. You gave them structure. Structure created confidence. Confidence improved performance. Performance strengthened reputation. Across the atrium, a familiar presence entered quietly through the north entrance. Alexander Kane. He wore a charcoal suit, understated but precise. His presence did not draw attention in obvious ways, yet space seemed to adjust subtly around him. Individuals moved slightly aside, without fully realizing why. He walked toward the cafe seating area, pausing briefly near the directory. Nina noticed him only after finishing her review notes. Their eyes met across the distance. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging without intrusion. She approached calmly. "Good afternoon," she said. "Good afternoon," he replied. His tone remained as measured as the first day they had spoken. "You appear well," he observed. "I am," she said simply. Alexander glanced briefly toward the cafe counters where staff members worked efficiently, maintaining the standards Nina had helped implement. "Order has improved," he noted. "Consistency encourages confidence," Nina replied. A faint expression of approval crossed his features. "You have applied discipline effectively," he said. Nina considered the phrasing. "I applied patience," she corrected gently. Patience had guided every decision she had made since the afternoon Ryan attempted to reclaim influence through humiliation. Ryan himself had not returned to the mall since the administrative review concluded months earlier. Reports suggested his firm had undergone internal restructuring after several lenders reevaluated exposure risk. Nothing publicly dramatic had occurred. No scandal headlines. No public confrontation. Just adjustment. Quiet consequences. Alexander rested one hand lightly on the back of the chair beside him. "Dignity often produces delayed results," he said. "But lasting ones," Nina replied. He nodded once. A server approached, offering tea. "Chamomile," Alexander requested. The same choice he had made the first afternoon. Continuity carried meaning. They sat briefly near the window overlooking the atrium. Customers moved calmly between storefronts, older couples walking unhurriedly, professionals conducting measured conversations over coffee. Normal life. Stable life. "You did not allow pressure to alter your direction," Alexander said. "I learned that reacting emotionally often benefits the wrong person," Nina replied. Alexander's gaze reflected quiet agreement. "Restraint is underestimated," he said. "Restraint protects clarity," she responded. Several moments passed in comfortable silence. Nina no longer felt the unease she had experienced months earlier. She did not feel indebted nor intimidated. She felt balanced. "Thank you," she said finally, "for intervening that day." Alexander considered the statement carefully. "Correction of imbalance benefits everyone," he said. "A principle rather than a favor." Nina appreciated that distinction. Across the atrium, a retired couple paused near the directory, consulting a printed map despite the presence of digital screens. Some individuals preferred tangible reassurance, even when technology offered convenience. Alexander observed the scene. "Stability," he said quietly, "is rarely accidental. It is usually built quietly," Nina replied. The jazz trio began a softer melody, one often played at formal gatherings attended by older professionals who valued tradition. Nina stood, preparing to resume her responsibilities. "It was good to see you again," she said. "And you?" Alexander replied. No promises were made. No expectations suggested. Respect existed without obligation. As Nina continued her round through the cafe locations, she noticed how easily her steps matched the rhythm of the environment she had helped stabilize. Her life was no longer defined by someone else's perception. It was defined by her own conduct. Across the city skyline, late afternoon sunlight reflected against the river, casting moving patterns of light across the glass surfaces of Chicago's architecture. Structures built carefully tended to endure. Quiet justice rarely appeared dramatic, but it restored proportion, and once proportion returned, dignity rarely left again. This story reminds us that dignity does not come from status, wealth, or the opinions of others, but from the quiet strength to live honestly despite judgment. True power is not shown through control or intimidation, but through discipline, restraint, and the courage to protect what is right. Sometimes justice does not arrive loudly or dramatically. It arrives through patience, integrity, and the steady refusal to accept humiliation as normal. The story teaches that a person's worth is never defined by their job title, past mistakes, or someone else's pride. In the end, respect is earned by character, and those who attempt to control others through fear eventually lose the very stability they depend on. Quiet integrity often builds a stronger future than loud dominance ever could. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.